The Long Road by Wolfland. Closing numb fingers around the Pokeballs at his belt, Steven called forth two of his Pokemon. Lily squealed in shock as she landed in the frigid water, her tendrils instantly curling tight against her head. Anorith also let loose a startled cry and skittered to high ground on the debris pile. Steven was quick to apologize for calling his partners out in such an unpleasant location. I'm sorry, guys. I know it's cold, but a friend is trapped. There's not much time. I need your help to get him out. Now trembling just like her trainer, Lily caught Anorith's concerned gaze. Quickly reaching a decision, both Pokemon offered a confident nod, which Steven returned before he outlined his plan. Lily, see if you could get a grip under that boulder and lift it so Anorith can slip through. It should be loose enough to shift. Then we'll all work together to lift from both sides. Steven cursed his chattering teeth, but the instructions were clear. Lily chirped as she pressed into action, firmly digging her tentacles in the water in search of a rock she could move. Anorith perched at her side, fins twitching, anxious to find his way through to the other side. It didn't take long for Lileep's probing to pay off, and she chirruped once before straining upwards, and Steven heard rocks shift beneath the surface. Okay, Anorith, see if you can make it to Wallace's side. Without hesitation, Anorith clacked its claws in an affirmative and dove into the water. After a few tense moments, Lileep's head raised a bit more, and a tandem of calls sounded over the rushing water. Anorith had made it through. Now lift! We need to make an opening large enough for a person! Lileep crooned in confirmation, and strained against the weight of the rubble once more, twisting and craning her neck to get better leverage. But the pile only shifted slightly. Steven clenched his fists. This wasn't working fast enough. Lileep gave a startled chirp as her trainer suddenly appeared at her side and plunged both hands into the icy water. Come on! It was a frustrated shout more at the stubborn boulders than anything else, but Lileep was spurred on nonetheless and trilled loudly as she redoubled her efforts. Both trainer and Pokemon pulled as hard as they could. Even though Steven couldn't feel his hands any longer, he knew that they were still firmly gripped to the edge of the rock. He wouldn't let go, even as the water was now up to his shoulders as he leaned into the lift, eyes squeezed shut and hunched over, straining with all his might. And suddenly, he felt a shift. His eyes shot open to a burst of light at his side. Lileep was glowing. A triumphant warble sounded above the rushing water as Credilli's form took shape. The curving arch of her neck elongated and grew thicker. A warm touch pressed into his leg as her body grew in size, sturdier than ever. Purple and green mottled together as her shell grew and shifted. Her tentacles now bloomed from the back of her skull, and two yellow eyes peeked out from the green shell that encompassed her face. A fearsome warrior's helm. A startling crunch tore Steven's gaze from Credilli. To his surprise, a large blue claw was now jutting through the pile of debris. Clamping down tightly, it ripped back in the direction from whence it came, and a large eye filled the resulting void, accompanied by a brilliant red eye spot. A throaty roar sounded through the gap, and Credilli gleefully returned a cry of her own. Anorith? The rumbling chatter from his Pokemon confirmed it. A double evolution. Armaldo's eye disappeared, and its claw shot through the gap again, this time turned upward, wedging against the slab above. Credilli caught on to Armaldo's plan, and began pulling the adjacent rocks free, creating a larger and larger hole, while Armaldo kept the opening from collapsing. Water poured through, equalizing the levels on both sides. Steven wobbled a bit as he straightened, now feeling his arms move from sheer will alone. He dove into helping Credilli clear whatever rocks he could, and soon he was greeted with the sight of Spiel being hoisted through the hole, with Wallace's upper half wriggling through just after. Wordlessly, Steven reached out to grasp the other trainer's hand, and together they tugged until Wallace slipped all the way through. Stumbling as he let go, Steven felt a steadying tendril snake around his shoulders. Armaldo rattled a cry of celebration and hastily gestured with its free claw. Credilli tapped at her trainer's bell to relay Armaldo's request, and Steven got the hint. He fumbled the Pokeball only momentarily before aiming the recall beam through the gap. As Armaldo vanished in the beam of red light, the unsupported slab slammed down, sealing the passage once more. Credilli chirped happily to be reunited with her teammate, and Steven was finally able to turn his attention to the disheveled trainer standing safely before them. "Wallace! Thank goodness you're okay!" Wallace stood, stunned, staring at the relief on Steven's visibly paling face. You saved us. Melodic's strongest attack couldn't even get that rock to budge." Now it was Steven's turn to chuckle, although it sounded weak as his shivering intensified. "All it took was a little teamwork," he grinned, "and a bit of caving know-how." Wallace's expression softened as he smirked. "I guess your peculiar hobby isn't totally useless, then." "I'll take that as a compliment," Steven stuttered, wrapping his arms across his chest to keep them from shaking. "Now let's get out of here. I'm freezing!" Wallace nodded in agreement, although he cast a wary look at Steven's retreating form when the trainer wavered unsteadily as he made his way to the base of the ladder. With Spiel safely tucked against his chest, Wallace held his sideways gaze when he caught Steven's forlorn stare as he looked up at their exit. "One last climb. Can't be worse than the first one," Wallace said, trying to sound cavalier, and Spiel clapped its encouragement in response. But as Steven finally tore his gaze from the top of the ladder, the look in his eyes sent a knot of concern tumbling in Wallace's gut. "Wallace, I can't feel my hands." By now, Steven was shivering uncontrollably, and Wallace worriedly pursed his lips. He had been around water long enough to recognize the early signs of hypothermia, and Steven surely had not come prepared to deal with the frigid water conditions they were facing. He also knew now was not the time for panic, and Wallace kept his tone even as he spoke. "Can your partner help you to climb? If she can get you most of the way up, I can hoist you the rest of the way from the top." Credilli chirped at Wallace's words, and nuzzled against Steven's chest as she sidled close, her tendrils protectively curling around his frame. Weakly reaching to cradle his enthusiastic Pokemon's head, Steven nodded, although he appeared slightly dazed by the whole situation. "I think Credilli is telling us it's no problem." "Good." Wallace had already begun to scale the ladder. "Once I get to the top, have Credilli help you climb until I can reach you." Steven nodded again, drawing a shaky breath, but feeling far too lightheaded to be confident. Jaw set, he willed his quaking limbs to move, and as he moved to grasp the first rung, a tendril coiled around his midsection. Looking over his shoulder, Credilli's yellow eyes locked onto his own, and she bobbed her head with a cheerful chirp. And so he climbed, inch by agonizing inch. All the while, Credilli's steady pressure kept him centered on the ladder. Just as she neared the limit of her reach, another firm grip found his arms, and Wallace hauled him up to the top. As Steven sat kneeling, trying to catch his breath, Wallace held out both hands. Steven stared up at him with a puzzled look. "One is for Credilli's Pokeball. The other is so I can get you on your feet, and together we can finally leave this dreadful place." Steven complied, and in a flash, Credilli was back on his belt as another Pokemon was summoned by his companion. The Melodic's melodic song echoed through the main chamber, and Wallace swiftly hopped onto her back. When the tide is in, there's no direct path to the exit on solid ground. Bring out your flyer and have them carry you over to the exit. Victoria will swim me out." Stephen eyed the low ceiling and the expanse of the now flooded tidal pools, and grimaced. He promised Skarmory he wouldn't. As Matang materialized, Wallace's brow arched in a silent question. "If Matang keeps to the shallow edge of the pools, there should be enough earth for it to levitate just fine," Stephen stuttered out between shivers, while ignoring his starter's worried glances at the sorry condition its trainer was in once again. Wallace was in no mood to press Stephen's explanation further, so he simply nodded. "I'll stay close."